Welcome back everyone to the second video in section 1 of the Getting Started series. Now, so far we've got you all settled in with your seat and headrest adjusted just right. And now let's move on to the mirrors. And the first mirror on the list is the rearview mirror. Now, when you're setting your rearview mirror, you want it to look like the back window is centered in your mirror. So you may see a little of the roof or a bit of the back seat, or at least the headrests in the back seat. And then don't forget to double check your settings once you're out driving. Okay, now let's talk about the side mirrors. Now, whether you're driving a 2-door or 4-door vehicle, you want to set your side mirrors so that you can see the back quarter of your vehicle, around where the wheel wells start, as shown by the X on each of these vehicles. And then your vision will just continue on and on behind you. Then, once you're driving, if you're on a street with one lane in each direction and you're driving on the right side of the street, you would see something like this in your right side mirror. And you'll see something like this in your left side mirror. And of course, if you drive on the left side of the street, these examples would be in the opposite order. Okay, now let's move on to the steering wheel. Now, a lot of vehicles have a steering wheel adjuster, which moves the steering wheel lower and higher, and it's usually located around this area here, the lower bottom area on the left side, close to the steering wheel. So if you have one, just play with it a little bit so you can see for yourself if it's of any help to you. Now, over the years, things have changed a lot due to airbags. So, unless you're driving a vehicle made before the year 1999, your vehicle will have airbags. Now, studies throughout the years have found that driving with your hands at the 10 and 2 position can actually put you at risk for numerous hands and arm injuries and even some facial injuries because your hands and arms get blown back into your face at a high velocity of speed when the airbag is deployed. So because of that, nowadays the golden standard is to have your left hand anywhere between the 8 to 9 o'clock position and your right hand anywhere between the 3 to 4 o'clock position. Now, since airbags deploy out and upwards, with your hand sitting a little lower on the steering wheel, if anything happens, your hands and face won't become a casualty of the collision. Now, you want to use that hand position mentioned when you're just driving straight ahead, like in this example here. But when it comes time to turn, well, that's a different story because each turn has its own steering method, which we'll talk about in the Side Street Driving series, section 3, where I introduce everything that you need to know about side street intersections and all the maneuvers that you'll make at one, like making right and left turns. Which reminds me to remind you that if you subscribe to my channel and hit that notifications button, you will know right away when each new video is posted. Okay, now let's switch topics and start talking about a typical starter for a vehicle and the actual process of starting a vehicle. So a typical starter that requires a key is set up similar to this, where you have the lock position, which is where you turn the key to shut off the vehicle and to take the key out. And next is the accessories position. So when you turn your key to this position, you can run things on your vehicle that requires power without your engine being started, like to set your electronic seats as mentioned before, or run your stereo, etc. But be aware this can drain your battery, so don't do this for too long, and if you have an older battery, you may want to severely limit using this feature. And then you have the on/start position. So here, to start your vehicle, you'll turn the key as far forward as possible into the start position, and you'll either hear two things. You should hear a tiny little roar, which is the sound of your engine starting, and at that point, you should release pressure off of your key, and it will fall back into the on position all on its own. Or if you've held the key just a little too long, you're going to hear an awful sound as your starter screams at you. "Let go, you're killing me, kid!" Now, all jokes aside, you will definitely know if you've held the key for too long. And in fact, it's better to let go too soon and have to retry than to hold it for too long. But really, it's not a big deal. You will get the hang of it quickly. Now, before we move on, I just want to warn you that it's not a good idea to have your ignition key hooked up to a heavy key ring with a lot of keys on it. Or even just a heavy key ring, like this one here, which is made out of metal. Having heavy weight pulling down on both the key and the ignition mechanism can damage both of these things and will cause them to wear out faster. But if you want to go ahead and keep your cool keychain, maybe just hook it up to one of these dual key holders, where you can have your ignition key on its own and it can be disconnected from the rest of your keys whenever you're driving. Okay, now let's move on and talk about push-button starters. So to start your vehicle, you must have your key fob inside the vehicle with you, and your foot must be pressing on the brake pedal as you push and hold the start button until the engine starts. And if you want to use the accessories only, well, then push the starter button once with no contact with your brake pedal, just the button only. Now, in regard to key fobs, first off, they work off of a battery, so no juice in the battery, no working key fob. And a typical battery lasts about 3 to 4 years. And here's some signs that your battery might be getting low. So first off, you may notice that the signal strength is getting weaker, where you have to be closer to the vehicle now for your key fob to unlock the doors or the trunk. And then next on the list is, nowadays your vehicle is acting funny when you go to start it, like it really didn't want to start. So before you panic, check your battery. And then finally, the light on the LED flashlight is either getting really weak or it's not working at all. So if you notice any of these 3 things, well, I'd replace your battery sooner rather than later. Okay, before we move on, I've got one last tip. So if you go to start your vehicle and nothing happens, check that your gear shifter is in park. Once in a very blue moon, a person can get distracted and turn their vehicle off without shifting into park. And if this is the case, your vehicle won't even try to start. So once again, before you panic, check your gear shifter. And speaking of your shifter, let's talk about some things you should know. So, first and foremost, when you first start your vehicle and want to shift into any gear, you will need to engage your brake pedal first. Now, in reality, you're going to come across all kinds of different gear choices, like D3 and D4, M+, M-, B, etc., etc. I mean, it sounds like a weird report card. So what this means to you is there are very specific ways you should drive certain vehicles in very specific gears. So you will need to take the time to get to know your specific vehicle's needs. Now, here's a few generic things to know. Second gear can be helpful when you're doing things like driving down a steep hill. It's going to keep your speed lower, and you won't have to rely on your brake as much. And it's also helpful when you're driving in heavy snow and you need some extra traction. And first gear is helpful in situations where you need as much traction as possible, like if you find yourself stuck in snow or mud. And it's also helpful when you're doing things like launching or retrieving a boat at a boat launch, those kind of things. And now, this looks like a good place to end. So that means we're at that point where I'm always saying things like, if you love this video, can you like it? And if you haven't subscribed yet, why not hit that button too? What the heck? And when you have some time, I'll see you over at the third and final vehicle knowledge video, where we'll finish up by talking about the heating system and maybe a couple more things thrown in for good measure. Alrighty, so until next time, take care.